So you looked out into your garden and you realize you don't have a whole bunch of fruit forming on your plants, and it's really driving you crazy. And it's probably because you don't have a whole bunch of little buzzy things flying around. Well, I've got 3 little tips that will help you get more fruit on most of your vegetables in your garden, and it's sure not to squash your hopes. All right, let's go. Hi, I'm Doc, and welcome back to my garden. Now today we're going to talk about pollinating our plants. We all run into that time of year where it's either too hot, it's too cold, maybe we don't have a bunch of pollinators buzzing around to make sure we get the fruit we want, but our plants look healthy. So we want to get that fruit. So I'm going to tell you how to pollinate your plants on your own, but I want to explain how they work first. There's a couple of different types of things. Now we're not talking about every single plant in your garden. We're going to talk about some specific kinds of plants. Let's start with open pollinating. What is an open pollinated plant? An open pollinated plant is a plant that can cross with members of its own species, okay? In this case, we've got cucumbers, squash, pumpkins. Those are open pollinated plants. But it's more important in open pollinating to know that the flowers are different. We have 2 types of flowers on an open pollinated plant, a male and a female. The female typically has a small fruit in the case of cucumbers and squash, same way. Male plant does not, it just has a flower. So in nature, what happens is the flowers open up, the bees come in or the insects come in, and they move the pollen from the male into the stamen of the female, and then what we end up with is a fruit. These little fruits, although you may think you have a bunch of cucumbers coming, are not pollinated yet because there's still a flower on them. So I'm going to show you how to make that work. Squash is the same way. Now we also have self-pollinating plants. Self-pollinating plants like tomatoes have a different kind of flower. They have what's called a perfect flower. That perfect... I just had a wasp land in the male flower, but then he flew the tomatoes. Anyway, a perfect flower means it's got the male and female parts that are there. So in most cases with self-pollinating plants like peppers, eggplants, tomatoes, things like that, when the flower opens up, they just kind of pollinate themselves. It lets the pollen fall to the stamen and everything is good. However, high humidity, high heat, lots of things can contribute to the fact that they're not being pollinated, and we still need those insects to really help us along. So I'm going to show you a couple of techniques today that my grandmother taught me, one that my father taught me, and that I use when I have problems like I have right now. Things aren't pollinating the way they should be. All right, let's get our hands dirty. So the first technique we're going to talk about is called, well, what I call beat it. Now beat it sounds exactly what it is, but it only works on self-pollinating plants, meaning perfect flowers, tomatoes, peppers, things like that. This is actually a technique that I saw my grandmother use quite a bit, and she used it mainly on tomatoes. And it's called beat it because you use a stick. So in the beat it method, the idea is that as the flowers open on the plant, like we have here, they're ready. They're ready to drop the pollen. They're ready for everything to spread between flowers. But for whatever reason, it's not getting there. My grandmother's garden was in a very humid climate as well, and she always told me that was what the problem was with it, even though maybe pollinators were also the issue too. And to beat it, it's exactly what she would do. She would walk by and beat the plants. Now don't do it too hard, you'll destroy your plants. And I always thought this was kind of brutal. You can see, I can see stuff falling off of the flowers up top, even though you may not be able to in the camera. But it's a really simple technique. Beat your plants. Now again, this only works for perfect flowers, so self-pollinating, peppers, things like that. If you're feeling a little frustrated and anxious, maybe take a little frustration out on your plants. It works. So the next method that I saw my father and my grandmother both use is called the shake it method. It really only, again, works on self-pollinating plants, things like tomatoes. And as you can see, the flowers, they're open, they're ready to go, and they're ready to pollinate. But in this case, they're not pollinating very well. I do have a few tomatoes on here. So we're going to use the next method. Really difficult. I need you to just pay very close attention. It's important. Grab the plant and gently shake it. I actually like this one better. And the reason I like this one better is because it allows the plants to actually stay stable. They're in your hand and it still moves everything around. That's it. All right, now final method, my favorite one actually, and the one that my dad has used and I have used, and we've kind of used it in different ways over time, but I find this one to be most successful. Now we talked about tomatoes, peppers, perfect plants, right? Self-pollinating. Now we're going to talk about open pollinated. In this case, we're going to use cucumbers. This works also for squash and for pumpkins, things like that as well. This is what we're going to do. Now remember I told you open pollinated plants in a lot of cases have a male and female flower. All we have to do is cross between the two of them, and this is what we need. It's called the brush it method. So all we're going to do is we're going to find a female plant. Here's one here. Now, cucumbers are kind of hard because the flowers are very, very small. So I have a very fine-tipped, small-ended brush. We have to go from the male flower to the female flower. So we have a female flower here. You can tell that because there's actually a fruit there. And we've got a couple of male flowers here below it. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to go into the male flower. You have to be kind of careful with these. They're very small. The throats of the cucumbers are very small. This works much better on squash and easier. That's why we have this small brush. So I'll just paint it inside. I'll paint it inside a couple of the male flowers. And then I'll go to the female flower and paint it around in there. And then I can just keep repeating this process with the same or different male flowers and go to the female flowers. When you find them, it works really well for squash, like I said, pumpkins, gourds, things like that. But this is for a open pollinated plant, okay? It does not have a perfect flower like a tomato or a pepper. So that's the three techniques. All right, guys, it's pretty easy. Let's summarize what we talked about. First of all, there's two types of plants that we're talking about here, open pollinated and self-pollinated. Open pollinated plants tend to have a male and female flower. In order for them to form fruit, an insect or something else has to come in and cross the pollen between the male plant and to the stamen of the female plant to make the fruit set. Those are things like cucumbers and squash in our case. Now we also have self-pollinating. Self-pollinating means that there is a perfect flower. It has both male and female parts, and really all it takes is for the flower to open up and pollen to move around within that flower, and that will get it pollinated. Sometimes you have issues with too much humidity causing that pollen not to move, and therefore that's why we use those techniques. That would be tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, things like that. Now, step one, the beat it method. Grab a stick, beat those plants. Now, this works when the flowers are open and it has to be a self-pollinating or perfect flower plant. Method two is the shake it method. The shake it method is just what it sounds like. Grab that plant and shake it around. Now again, self-pollinating, the flowers need to be open for that to work. The third method, the paintbrush method, or the brush it method, works well on all types. You can also do it with the self-pollinating just like you can the open pollinating. But the open pollinating requires it. On an open pollinated plant, you need to take your small little brush, you go from a male flower to a female flower and back and forth and back and forth, and that will get the pollination done. That's really it. Now it is important to note that a self-pollinating plant can also be an open pollinating plant. And there's some discussion in there about how those words are used and why they're used interchangeably, heirlooms thrown in there. Those are not the scope of this video, but there are other things to it. Just know what is open pollinated, meaning has a male-female flower, and self-pollinating is the biggest thing. If it's not self-pollinating, you know you're going to have to use that paintbrush method. Don't forget to like and share. It's the most important thing in the world to me. It helps me grow. It helps me know what you guys like and want to see. And also, I love to see your comments as well. Those things are really, really important to me, and I love interacting with everybody. I try to hit every single comment, although I do miss some. And you know, if you're not subscribed, wouldn't hurt to go ahead and subscribe already. All right, guys, I want to leave you like I always leave you. There's really only 4 things you need to live a well-balanced life. Number 1, you need to have something to believe in. Number 2, you need to have someone to love. Number 3, you need to have something to do. And number 4, you have to have something to look forward to. Guys, if you can find those things in your life, you're gonna have an amazing life. Things are rough right now, things are tough right now, but we're all gonna get through it. And if you keep those 4 things in mind, I promise you will too. I look forward to working in my garden, working outside with the chickens, the bees, all kinds of stuff. And I love talking to you guys. All right, that's it. I'll see you in the next one. Doc out.